Reframing for strategic creativity. We're exploring taxonomies that we can use for reflection. And there's a very useful model that we can use called the Ripples model. The Ripples model is used by the reflective practitioner to begin to address certain issues in the teaching by raising questions in particular key areas. So what we can first of all do is begin to consider what some questions might be for the reflective practitioner. We can actually look at the learners and as a reflective practitioner begin to try to understand what their experience of learning is. How are they approaching their role as a learner? What motivates them? What desires do they have? What interests do they have? And from this perspective for the teacher, for the reflective practitioner, we can begin to wonder how the students are taking ownership of the process of learning and therefore being empowered by the experience in the classroom. Other questions that the Ripples model can be used for are in terms of the strategies that we're using for teaching. Are the learners learning through practical activities, through processes where they can directly engage with knowledge and skills development and learn inductively as well as deductively in the classroom? What is a useful question to ask within this model are things like the process of guiding learning for the students. So in other words, how are we providing feedback which structures learning for the students, and how effective, how critical is that feedback process? And through this feedback process we can consider the extent to which students are developing, are learning, and how much they are a part of that process of learning. In the Ripples model here, we can see how these questions can come together within a particular taxonomy. You can see it's called the Ripples model because it's like ripples on top of water when you throw in a stone. At the center is what is known as wanting or needing, aspects of the reflective practice process, which is focused on what the learners want from learning, what the students need in order to learn. And this has a consequence for what we do with them, how we work with them, the strategies, the approaches that we're using for teaching. From this doing in the classroom that the reflective practitioner begins to make sense of teaching and learning, starts to create frames, conceptual frames for the approaches which are being employed. From making sense of doing in the classroom, there is this system of feedback, or in other words, the reflective process takes place where information is brought back, internalized by the teacher, and therefore used to inform the next level, which is teaching, the actual process of developing approaches and strategies. And of course, in the Ripples model, what's important to realize is the final stage, the final level, is assessing the effect of our teaching. What is actually the benefit? What's the outcome of what we've been doing with the students? What we can see from this is that the Ripples model is actually not a cycle. It is a progression, starting from the center point, which is wanting and needing and doing. Or in other words, we are learning by doing as reflective practitioners, and through this progression, moving through the reflective practice process very systematically by looking at different strategies in terms of reflection. And therefore, in terms of the Ripples model, real learning for the reflective practitioner begins at that center point and radiates outward like ripples on water through very specific stages of understanding and skills development.